I just don't wanna. It's a familiar refrain for those with wandering minds. So what do we do when we just don't wanna? Welcome to the Rhythms of Focus podcast for wandering minds who are tired of feeling that they have to force themselves to make things happen. Maybe know that when things line up well, that tendency to wander actually becomes a powerful wave of focus. I'm Dr. Kourosh Dini, fellow wandering mind. It wasn't that long ago that I struggled to make things happen, whether it was to remember when to pay a bill, do things over time, or look at a list without feeling repulsed. Fast forward through years of study and practice, I can now not only deal with the world, I can be creative, playful, and engage in the ways that make sense to me. I can be a doctor, musician, father, still play games in the evenings. I've created this podcast to share these ideas so you can do the same, hopefully with a lot less of the troubles I needed to go through to get here. Whether you have ADHD, deal with anxiety, or just suffer from a powerfully creative spirit, I invite you to join me in this weekly podcast to start finding your own way to a calmer, more intuitive space. Please note, I'm not functioning as your doctor, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, therapist, or otherwise. This is here for education, if not entertainment, and I do hope you enjoy it. You may well know that once you're in it, you're good to go. But getting there can be terribly difficult. Yelling, "Just start," hardly works. And when it does, it carries this host of troubles. In earlier episodes, I talked about dopamine and the interest-based nervous system, as it's been called, and how we might use these ideas against ourselves to say that we need some chemical or pre-existing emotion to get to work. We adopt a sense that we cannot work by our own will. But I did also hint at a third point of view. We often focus on attention. For example, one type of wandering mind often carries such a diagnosis, ADHD. It's right there in the title, right? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there's even the inattentive type, where we say that is the main focus. But what's profoundly missing from the title, and other wandering minds, such as the anxious, the creative, the absent-minded, and the like, is the sense of agency. Now, what is that? Sounds simple, maybe boring. Why bother with such an abstract idea? What does agency have to do with anything? This central idea is a pillar to everything I write about, how I function as a psychoanalyst, and how I function as a teacher. If you want to know the secret to what makes me stand out as a productivity talking head, I believe it comes from this focus on supporting our sense of agency and not about doing things. So I hope you'll indulge me for a moment as we take this concept apart, because I strongly believe that this not-so-simple skill is a trellis that supports so much, if not all, meaningful growth. Now, what do I mean by agency? Here's the definition. Agency is the skill and degree to which we can decide and engage non-reactively. Let me repeat that definition. Agency is the skill and degree to which we can decide and engage non-reactively. All right, so let's take that apart and see what we get. Hopefully, I'll be able to convey what is so vital about this. When I use the phrase non-reactive, that's the end of the sentence there, that deciding and engage non-reactively, it means that we can sense our world within us, that emotional, thoughtful world, without being swept away. It's far too easy, and maybe even the default, to be carried by these waves. When we catch ourselves in the middle of an email, not realizing how we even got there, we're reactive. When we worry and can't decide on something, we're reactive to that worry. When we flip off that person that almost ran us off the road, we're reactive to that anger. Our interests, wants, needs, impulses, worries, and cares, they all touch, wash over, if not crash into us as waves. But when we can sense these emotions, these feelings, these thoughts, to whatever degree we can and begin seeing them as information, we start to recognize the options they represent. Hearing that information, these messengers from within, we're much more likely to engage from a place of meaning rather than one of reaction. As such, we can now decide from the options they give us, connecting to whatever we find most meaningful in that moment. And from this point, we can begin to engage. Here, the decision starts to take shape. We begin collapsing the cloud of possibilities that once had been, perhaps mourning the fantasies of what could have been. From this non-reactive space, we can deliberately choose our next path. Whether that's about deciding to have a cup of tea instead of diving into cleaning the closet, or planning out the next quarter's business plans. In that nameless space, where we form our options from our experience non-reactively, we act with our greatest clarity. The beauty of agency is that it's a skill, something we can nurture and strengthen over time. Every time we notice a wave and choose our response, we're practicing agency. It's like a musician learning a new piece. We improve not by perfection, but by returning to the practice again and again. And of course, we all get swept away from time to time. That's not failure, it's part of being human. But every time we can catch ourselves, where we can notice and realize we have a choice, we strengthen our skill. As a simple example, I'm writing, and I notice this message alert at the top of my screen. Oh, hey, message from someone I've been waiting for. So I click it. Maybe I could just take care of that real quick. And somewhere on the way to that message, maybe even as I'm writing it, there's this brief flicker of awareness that comes to mind. I'm wandering. I may not even remember where I'd wandered from. But in that skill, that pause, that's where I can start to sense my options. Oh, I'm writing a message here, but I have this vague feeling that I was just doing something else. Oh wait, I was writing. And then maybe I feel a disappointment that I even wandered off. Or maybe I feel an excitement for what I'm about to write to the friend of mine. Maybe a thought about being thirsty comes to mind too. And while I'm waiting in that pause, I wonder how I drifted from writing. It's not just distractibility. It's that I hit a wall of confusion while I was writing. I didn't know what to write. I didn't know the order. Oh no, people are going to think that I'm full of it and I don't know what I'm talking about. That message that showed up in the corner of my screen gave me a way out. And my magnified mind, this small work table from which I can work, can easily have its contents knocked aside. It's not just distractibility. It's that the emotions as they are huge, and they flash past quickly. But as I paused, I thought, if I can sit with that confusion in the writing, I often can find a path forward, discover something useful and interesting along the way. The work is to be with it. I bring the document back, and I leave it in front of me as I wait there, seeing what comes to mind, maybe starting to nudge something forward. That decision came from heightened agency. That came from an acknowledgement of my world within, which came from consideration, which ultimately came from the birthplace of it all, a pause, the simplest and most difficult of any form of meaningful productivity. But because this is a skill, means we can practice. It is something we can get better at. Behind this practice of agency is the agent itself. Some in the neuropsychoanalytic community, for example, might argue that the purpose of consciousness itself is decision, agency. We might wonder whether we have free will or if everything is determined. But rather than view things through this dichotomy, what if we instead focused on this sense of our ability to make a decision non-reactively, something we can practice and then have more or less of? Now, when it comes to a wandering mind, we often struggle. We lose things, we drop things, we lock ourselves out of the house, we dive deep, but then connect. We wade through scatter. We can do well here, but not there, but only today, and not tomorrow, and not yesterday. and it's not clear why. We might fear that if we decide to do something, we might choose poorly. And maybe that's because we have in the past. When we struggle to get things done while others nearby make their calls, do their work, get to the things they enjoy with little difficulty, we might wonder what gives. And well-meaning others alongside our own internal voice might point out our problems and ask, why can't you just? These gaffes, these stumbles, these insults, over and over, hit us. Many of us start to believe that there's something wrong with us. We lose trust in ourselves, and more specifically, in the sense of agency, our ability to decide and engage non-reactively. In other words, this core sense of agency becomes raw, injured, and hurt. Why can't you just, and other statements like these, reinforce the injury? When we tell ourselves or hear from others to do the laundry, the taxes, the whatever, and then some sensation holds us back, what's that? Some call it demand avoidance or pathological demand avoidance. Author Megan Anna Neff has a nicely considered article on her blog in which she makes a case for calling it pervasive drive for autonomy. Embedded within is this feeling of, I don't want to, or its close cousin, I can't be bothered. When I hear these phrases from others or myself, I hear it as this cry of injured agency. Beyond decision is this agent, the self, the person making the decision. The center of consciousness becomes this marker that we exist. When we don't trust ourselves to make decisions that feel meaningful, that feel to be in our best interest, and the best interest of those we love and care for, we can feel lost. And in those moments someone tells us what to do, they're taking away not only our decision, but our sense of personhood. Losing autonomy, we collapse, rebel, yell with the raw power of the time in our lives where we began to insist on our being, the toddler within. I don't wanna. No. These simple but powerful ways tell the world I exist. We instantly create this contrast through contest, through opposition, separating ourselves from the world. This injured sense of agency screams, I am, even if that looks like lying on the couch. And in those moments, we manage to fight through and stumble into some flow forward, and someone else says, hey, can you go do that thing? That thing that we were just about to do anyway? We collapse. Not because of some chemical, but because of that sense of agency, our personhood, our place to practice and grow from, feels like it's been taken. Crashing waves in the seas of a wandering mind's times of stress only make it worse. Our desire to simply exist becoming that much more profound, striving as we are not to drown. It might sound strange, but when agency is injured, some part of us absolutely resents being told what to do, even if that person is ourselves. And every attempt to force ourselves makes this rejecting part of us stronger, if not louder. Our sense of, hey, I should go do that thing, becomes this authority to which our injured sense of agency says no. When we're in this position, where we can't make ourselves do the things, and yet feel we must, we often resort to force. This can take many forms. Waiting for deadlines, creating fake deadlines, overscheduling ourselves, shaming ourselves, staking our reputation on something through public declarations of goals that are impossible, waiting until we feel like it, trying to fake feeling like it, asking others to remind us over and over, among many other possibilities. However we do so, it comes from this feeling that we cannot do it on our own. We do not trust ourselves. Still, once the momentum is there from whatever means we got there, once we, quote, just start, sometimes we can keep going. Might even support this with our tendency to conflate morality with sacrifice. Maybe our desire to be a good person requires pain. And with that idea in mind, we now have this recipe for an ever-worsening spiral. An awful torrential wind that creates a swing back and forth between tremendous effort and terrible collapse. And perhaps worse, seeming success at using force directly says we need force, that our sense of agency doesn't work. We cannot decide, we have no free will, and that to get any work done, any emotion that says otherwise should simply be ignored. Navigating can feel like moving through quicksand. And just as an aside, let me make things a little worse. The wins we achieve are often hollow. Even if the results outwardly look like we've done well, there's a fragility that comes from this forced nature. For example, let's say you get an A on a test. You've crammed for it the night before, but the knowledge disappears quickly. This emptiness comes not just from the superficial nature of the achievement, but from how we got it. Had we absorbed the same material over the same time frame, driven by genuine curiosity, a desire to learn, we would likely have remembered it much differently. Embedded within, at our disposal, rather than held in some fragile box of rote memory. Agency is injured. I don't wanna is the cry of an injured self. We double down on the things we can count on. Maybe that next deadline will light the fire of that fickle and dangerous fuel of anxiety. Maybe. So, of course, the question comes back, how do we regain agency? How do we heal it? How do we do what we want to when we just don't want to? The simplest, though also most difficult answer comes from the definition. Once again, agency is the skill and degree to which we can decide and engage non-reactively. To reach this state of being non-reactive means that we pause. We pause with that experience and with that decision, whatever the feeling, the object, the thing is that we are trying to confront. And we wait with that. We wait for our thoughts, for our feelings about it to come to mind, about that experience, that decision, whatever focus we've chosen. And when those feelings of anxiety, excitement, and the rest no longer tell you anything new, whether they've come to a standstill or they're simply repeating, they've come to this point of being settled. When we reach this point, we've let our ideas and sensations about something come to the standstill. We now have our options before us. We see the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations. We translate the messages they present as well as we can, at least for this moment. We've reached a height of agency. Simple, but not at all easy. I can tell you that I personally approach this in two ways, and I'll start with the more complex one first. The first is my being a psychoanalyst. In psychoanalysis, we look at a person's world through the lenses of meaning, motivation, and experience. We recognize the emotions, the thoughts, the winds, the waters, whether they caress or bash into this vessel of consciousness. We consider how, in our attempts to survive these seas, we might even inadvertently create and worsen conditions for ourselves. By examining these thoughts as they come to mind, their potential meanings that resonate from the stories within, we try to know where we might regain, discover, or create a sense of agency, so we can start taking charge of our lives once again. The human mind is a deep, vast, rich, and complex world, and the work can be considerable. But I believe there's also this second, simpler approach. At least has a much simpler beginning. And I've mentioned it already, and I'll mention it again. Pause. Quite likely you're in the middle of something. When aren't you? Maybe you're deciding what to do next. Maybe you're working on something. Maybe you're having dinner. Maybe you're spending time with someone. But in that pause, if you're able to do so, see what comes to mind about whatever it is you're doing. Some things might seem related, some may well not. You might even be surprised. You don't need to do a thing. But in being there, at least to whatever degree that's carrying to yourself, you connect more strongly with those forces within, including the subtle complexities that run beneath a deceptively simple, I don't wanna. Be there. And when no new information comes to mind, the options are before you. Thoughts from your past self, past intentions, memories, considerations for your future self, desire, worry. These are brought together in a respect for present self, your energies, the conditions, where you are in this moment. At this height of agency, you can decide to engage wherever you'd like, including doing nothing. Certainly there's more to say. Certainly there are means of structuring our decisions. In fact, that's the nature of story, of games, of tasks, of our very existence. In fact, in my Waves of Focus course, I outline several places where pausing can help, and then the structured decisions that can guide easing the burdens of a workflow, particularly for a wandering mind. So as a takeaway, maybe sometime this week, try to notice some moment where you feel swept away by a wave of emotion or some impulse. Can you pause, even briefly, and see what comes to mind? Maybe ask yourself, what are my options here? What feels most meaningful right now? Can those ideas come to a standstill, or maybe repeat with no new information? Every time you do this, you're practicing agency, guiding the boat, acting as the captain, one choice at a time. And if you want to take it to the next level, maybe you pay a visit to something you're avoiding, something you need to, quote, just start. And be there. See the options as they form. Maybe you do nothing, and that's fine. Maybe you nudge something forward. But now if you do, it'll come from that place of deep connection with yourself, rather than having shoved yourself through with an injuring just start. When performing a piece of music, there's more than play involved. There's also decision, a dance between flow of motion and the structures that are created. As I come to the end of one section of a piece, I need to remember where to turn next. And not only that, I need to do that without stumbling. The tiniest error in timing, even by fractions of a second, become readily apparent. While there is this practice to agency, that pause for options and decision, there's also a flow without pause. So after so much talk about it, this need to pause and wait, where does music fit? Where does craft fit? Where does the day-to-day work fit? And the answer is once again as simple as it is complex. Practice. In the quiet of home, away from everything, I can gently work through sections from one to another, slowing down, breaking things down, finding simplicity, in order to create the seamless blend from one musical world as it moves into the next. And the same goes for our workflows. It's not about discovering, hey, here's the next greatest hack. It's about finding the simple within the complex and practicing those ideas and pauses until we can return them into a flow. Most of mastery is a mastery of the basics. The following piece is called Wind at Play. It's in C major. It's a call to how the support of play is itself a practice. Before wrapping up here, I'd like to invite you to join my newsletter called The Weekly Wind Down, where I share more ideas about wandering minds and developing rhythms of focus. Head on over to rhythmsoffocus.com to sign up. It's free, and it's a great way to continue exploring these ideas between episodes.